Good morning, everybody. 10 o'clock on the dot. Welcome to Pastor's Bible Study. Welcome to our continued journey through the book of Ruth. So if you missed it, we finished Acts. So our very quick journey through the book of Acts. I hope those of you who've been along or were along for the long journey through the book of Acts will appreciate what we're doing in our weekend messages of kind of doing a shorter version of that and give you a chance to review for Jan and I and for our other pastors. I didn't realize, I told them on Monday, I didn't realize how perfect it was really to go straight from Easter resurrection into the book of Acts. So it's another one of those things that, if you think, oh, wow, that was really smart, you should do that. No, I didn't really think through that until last week. I thought, this is a really, really nice, natural next step to dive into Acts. So we're looking forward to the second season of that. And looking forward to these next few weeks. We've got 5 more weeks that we've set aside for the book of Ruth. It's got 4 chapters, and so we have high confidence that we will be able to finish the book in this 6-week time period that we set aside. Jan did what I usually do to her, sprung a question on me last week that I was completely unprepared for. Which was why Ruth? And I don't even know what I said because I hadn't really thought through that. I wasn't prepared for that. But basically, we over the course of the 7-8 years that we've been doing this, we've done a lot of New Testament books. We've only done a few Old Testament books. We did do Genesis in 1 year. I have no idea how we did that, covering that entire book in 1 year. So we haven't done as much Old Testament, and we did have a window here. Ruth is a very important book, as Jan mentioned last week, and I'll reiterate this week. So that was really the thought process, is what can we get in at the end of this semester, and then also what Old Testament book specifically could we do. So anyways, hope you enjoy this journey as we move through the book of Ruth. So I also appreciated last week, just we can all be on the same page with this. I grew up in the church. I went to Sunday school. I did Bible drills. I was really good at Bible drills as the preacher's kid. I was very proud of myself for how quickly I could find something in the Bible. But last week I was sitting up here in the front, and Jan said, "Turn to the book of Ruth." And I did what I normally do. I just went through, and then I went back the other way, and I thought, I hope nobody is watching that the senior pastor can't find the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. So she did very helpfully let us know that it's after Judges and before 1 Samuel. It's a short book, so you can easily miss it if you're just thumbing through like I was, but that's where the book of Ruth is. It's on page 235 in my Bible, which means nothing to most of you, but that's where it is. So we talked about really 2 key themes, two things that really make Ruth a significant book in the Old Testament. One being that Ruth establishes the ancestral line of David. Partly why it precedes 1st and 2nd Samuel. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, we see the anointing of David as king of Israel. But it also identifies not only the lineage, but it establishes that there is actually a foreigner who is a part of the lineage of David. And so we looked at Matthew's genealogy, which is a fascinating thing. As Jan pointed out, there's 4 women that are listed in the genealogy that Matthew includes, which that within itself was just not the norm for women to be included in the lineage, but also the 4 women that Matthew specifically chooses to identify each speak to this idea, this theme of God as being the God of all nations and the God of all people. And that thread really runs all throughout the Old Testament. We look at the world of the New Testament. Did I just say Old Testament, New Testament? Yeah. Theme runs all the way through the Old Testament. When we look at the world of the New Testament, we do see, and we'll actually talk about this weekend, we do see this very distinct cultural barrier between Jews and non-Jews. And yet, all throughout the Old Testament, there is this reminder going all the way back to Genesis 12, the original covenant with Abraham. All peoples of the world will be blessed through you. So Israel has this very important role to play in the world, which is not to be withdrawn unto itself, but to be a light to all the nations. And it's one of those things just out of human nature. Along the way, Israel will continue to struggle with that identity. But you look at pieces like Ruth and the prophets, and all throughout the Old Testament, there is this theme. This is not just about you, Israel. This is about a world that is bigger than your world. And Ruth certainly establishes that. So I want to do just a quick review. We did the first 15 verses of chapter 1 last week. So just to review the story a little bit. So the story begins in Bethlehem. Naomi, we get the sense from the very beginning that Naomi's going to kind of be the central character for us in this opening act of Ruth. Naomi has everything that she could ever have imagined. She has a husband, Elimelech. She has 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Then they hit a roadblock. There's a famine in Bethlehem that leads them to relocate, resettle in Moab. They traveled about 50 to 60 miles away from their home there in Bethlehem, resettling in Moab for the sake of being able to provide for their family. After resettling in Moab, this full life, this life that is everything she'd ever dreamed, it takes a sharp turn in an opposite direction. When her husband dies, leaving Naomi a widow, but she still has 2 sons. Somewhere in there, the 2 sons marry Moabite women. And it's not clear from those opening verses whether these sons marry before or after their father dies. But at some point they did. They are both married for about 10 years, and then both of her sons die. And we talked about that now this is complete opposite of the full life. This is an empty life. This is a life of great vulnerability for her at this point, because several things that Jan mentioned. Women could not own property or earn money. The oldest male was responsible for everyone in the family, and there was no broader social safety net. So there was a safety net within the family or within what was referred to as the clan. But outside of that, if you were in some ways disconnected from your family or disconnected from your clan, no one else was going to step in and claim responsibility for you, provide some sort of social safety net for you. And so in a foreign land, Naomi is just, she has no choice. She has to return to Bethlehem and simply hope that someone from her family, which by the way, her family would not have been Naomi's family that she came from, it would be Elimelech's family. That's really important to remember, that when a woman married, she joined the other family. So her parents and that family would not have been one that would seen her, themselves as being responsible for her. It would have been her husband's family. So she's going home, and her hope is that someone from her husband's family, or the husband's family in general, will provide some sort of support for her. And she leaves, remember, with her two Moabite daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth. But on the way, Naomi realizes that this won't fix the problem for Ruth or Orpah. And what, by the way, was the joke about Oprah? That's true. That's where Oprah's name comes from. Where did you get that? That sounds like from Oprah? There's like a video of Oprah saying this. One of the shows, all right. I'm still trusting that at about 65%. But so Oprah's name was misspelled. She's named after Orpah, is the rumor that is yet to be fully verified. But Naomi realizes that she has a significant problem. She has to return home. But the problem that Orpah and Ruth face, that there's no solution for them in Bethlehem. Their best bet is to stay in Moab and hope that they might marry Moabite men. And so she tries to convince them to return to Moab, basically saying, you have a better shot there. You're actually taking more risk on by going home with me to Bethlehem. And Orpah eventually sees the logic of what Naomi is saying. We could even go so far as to say that Orpah really makes the smart decision. Logically, everything that Naomi lays out for a woman in a patriarchal society who is now at a place of great vulnerability, we can say Orpah really makes a wise decision here. She decides to go back to Bethlehem, even though she doesn't want to. We can see that there is obviously a very real connection that these two women feel to Naomi. They want to go with her. Orpah wants to go with her, but she does see the logic of what Naomi has shared with her. But Ruth clings. Ruth clings. That's where we left off at verse 14. But Ruth clung to her. And we'll come back to that word and some of the significance of that word, clung or cling. She clings to her. So let me just pause there. Any questions or comments from those first 14 verses, just that opening section here? Anything you want to mention? We good? Okay, we'll dive in because, again, we only have 6 weeks to get through these 4 chapters, so we got to keep going. All right, verse 15. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So Naomi essentially says, you need to go back to the life that you used to live. You need to go back to your people. You need to go back to your nation, to your country. You need to go back to your gods. And Ruth's response is essentially, I've already left that behind. I'm not going back to that. I'm going with you. And I just want us to spend a moment thinking through all of the implications of what Ruth is saying here, not from our modern perspective, but from the perspective of the world in which she lived, the patriarchal society in which she lived, and how they understood culture and particularly religious perspective. So she's obviously saying, I'm going to leave a geographic space. She said, I'm going to go and I'm going to stay with you. So we're going to make this trip. So, okay, here's the first implication of this. They have to survive as Jan pointed out last week, they have to survive a long journey, 50 or 60 miles back to Bethlehem. That within itself was a risk. They, traveling together, had to make it back to Bethlehem. I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to stay with you. And it's important for us just to realize that people didn't do this outside of desperation. Remember, the only reason that Naomi and Elimelech leave their place of origin, they leave Bethlehem, is because of the famine. They have to do something in order to provide for their family. But this was not normal. So when we read the story of the prodigal son, this would be another example of that. And we read about Jesus. Jesus describes the prodigal son as the one who goes to a distant country. That really doesn't hit us as strongly as it should. Because when our kids grow up and, they get some job offers, and maybe their offer is in Houston or in Dallas or Austin or maybe right somewhere even closer, we're excited about that. We think, oh, that's good. We want our kids to be close. We were with our small group on Friday night. We were having this discussion about one of the families, the daughters getting married, and or just getting in. Well, actually, not quite engaged. The question was asked between the future son-in-law and dad. That's where we are in the process. So I'm not telling you who it is. So it's totally fine. But he's interned with a company in Houston, and so their hope is the oldest daughter is here in the Metroplex area, and the middle daughter will be in Houston, and so that's pretty good. They're close by. But, of course, we know, it could be Seattle. It could be Virginia. It could be, and that's something that we, as parents, we don't like necessarily. But it's not crazy. It happens in our world, right? California, right? Jan has a daughter who lives in California. That's a far and distant country, we might say. But still, there's not been discussion, I can assume, in between Jan and Deems about disowning their daughter because she's moved to a far and distant country. But because that's more normal for us, that's not normal for this world. So we start there, that just moving from a geographic place to another, that is a massive step. It's one aspect of Ruth fully abandoning her identity, the identity that she's had over the course of her life. And we should feel the level of shock that would really have been a part of that. By leaving a geographic place, this is another thing that's very different from our world and how we think of things. You were also, you necessarily were leaving your religious practice and understanding, because gods were thought to be geographically limited. So we serve the God in this particular place because this God is the God of this particular place. So I looked it up. There's two pronunciations for this, Jan. So just so you know, the god of Moab, I don't remember if you mentioned this last week. Did she? That is one. That is one. Chemosh is one pronunciation, or Kumosh is another one from Google. Okay, so... But gods were associated with place. They're geographically limited. And so there is this practical reality that I'm leaving the realm of my God, the Moabite God. There's no sacred places in Bethlehem that are dedicated to my God, and therefore I am not able to... It would be impossible for me to continue serving my God. By moving, she was, the implication of that, she is leaving her God. So she's saying, your God will be my God. And then there's this specific note that she says, where you die, I will die. But then she adds, and there I will be buried. Well, okay, why do you need to tell us that? Well, remember, ancient burial practice. So Jesus is laid out in a tomb. The women come to the tomb to anoint the body with oils and spices. And maybe you're thinking, well, why are they doing this? Well, they're doing that to help with the decomposition of the body, because a year after someone's death, the family would return, they'd collect the bones of their loved one, they would place that in a smaller box called an ossuary box, and then that box would be placed in one of the nooks in the family tomb, because that was the practice. You were buried with your family, with your clan. So remember Jacob and Joseph, who both pass away in Egypt. One of the things that they say to their loved ones before their passing is, you must take me back to be buried with my ancestors, with my people. The Old Testament often refers to death using that language as being gathered to one's people. And you may remember from the Exodus story, that's one of the things that the Israelites do. They travel with the bones of Jacob and Joseph. So it's likely, we can assume, that Naomi, on this journey from Moab back to Bethlehem, is actually bringing with her the bones of her husband and her two sons to Bethlehem. And so this is another step of abandoning the identity that she's known. Ruth is saying, I want to be fully united with your people. I will not be buried with my people in Moab. I will be buried with you and with your family. So that's another part of this abandonment of her identity. And then finally, verse 14, just to go back here a little bit. The language here of Ruth clung to her. So the Hebrew word here, just a few other places that it's used. First, Genesis 2:24. A man shall leave his father and mother and what? Cleave is the King James Version. Some other translations are hold fast or be united with. So there's this sense of being fully united with another person. The two become one. And this is the same Hebrew word that is used here as it describes how deeply Ruth is uniting herself to Naomi. The other way this word is used repeatedly in the Old Testament, which is somewhat interesting, is it's used to describe the relationship that Israel is supposed to have with Yahweh. Israel is meant to cleave to Yahweh, to cling to Yahweh, to hold fast in Israel's relationship to Yahweh. And so in some ways here, it's sort of foreshadowing with this language, seeing Ruth as acting as a true Israelite. So she's from Moab. She wasn't born as a Jew, but she's actually living according to the values of a true Israelite in the way that, in her devotion that she has to Naomi. And we'll kind of carry that theme forward too, as a new character will enter into the story here in just a moment. But let's pause there, verse 15 through 18. This is Ruth's covenant that she makes with Naomi. Questions, thoughts, comments that you might like to share. Down here, Greg. Give it a toss there, Sri. Let's see. Okay, we're pretty close. There we go.
Yeah, this verse 16, we don't think about Ruth a lot, but to me, when Ruth is mentioned, this verse, quotes from this verse, is most often quoted.
Yeah.
And that relates to the book of Ruth to me.
Yeah, it's probably the most well-known verse from this book. And then Beth had her hand over here. I bet she's going to talk about Seattle.
I had a thought that her mom and her family might not have treated her very well, and her mother-in-law was so loving and wonderful that she decided this is my family.
Yeah.
And I don't
Yeah.
need to go back to those people.
Yeah.
I also like that when we use this verse in weddings.
I think James Avery has a ring that has these words inscribed in the inside.
I just have two words. Sister Act. The movie.
I know, I need more than 2 words.
Well, I can't sing it, but
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. I will follow you. Okay. Sorry, I don't have a clip. This.
Thank you for not singing.
You're welcome, Dad. Yeah. If you're watching online, the comment was, "Thank you for not singing that."
That 16th verse also says, your God will be my God.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I really like the phrase reasonably speculate, or what we can reasonably assume. There's lots of things, and you've heard me say this many times. There's lots of things that are not clearly outlined for us, and we can sort of ask questions, and I think in asking questions of the text, it kind of deepens our understanding. You know, this covenant that Ruth makes, there's certainly an influence. We'll talk more about this in just a second. An influence that Naomi's faith has had on Ruth. To what extent that has happened, we don't know. That's not clearly stated. There are hints here of that. She not only says, your God will be my God, but notice how she personalizes her understanding of this God by saying, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely. So she's speaking of more of a faith in that God, an awareness of that God, a belief. But we might ask the question at this point, like, how much of this covenant, how much of this commitment is to Yahweh, and how much of it is to Naomi personally? It's just sort of both wrapped up in there, which is kind of interesting to think about. That I think in part because it reminds us that, you know, when people come to a new relationship with Jesus, there really is a lot that's wrapped up into that. And the relationship that they have with other people is a key part of that. They don't just come to some belief in 10 different things about God. They come by way of relationship. And so Naomi has a relationship with Ruth that has communicated something to her about who God is and her understanding of her God. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Teresa?
Yeah, I think you're right on that, is that she must have, her faith, Naomi's faith, must have been something that you'd want to cling to. I mean, like you said, it wasn't just her. There's something that once she believed, then God was working with Ruth that she knew that was what, I mean, why else would she give up her whole identity, her whole life and everything?
Yeah.
So there's something very powerful there that she put her faith in to make that decision. And it wasn't about her, it was about what she was supposed to do, it seems like.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, and maybe Jan would like to weigh in here. But I am placing my faith in God through the faith that I have in you. That's kind of what I'm communicating or thinking about here, is that when someone makes a commitment, they really make it by way of their faith and love and trust they have in another person, the influence they've had on their life. Do you want to add anything to that?
No,
Okay, thank you.
I think that was very good. Sari handed me the microphone anyway.
Back here, Randall.
You know, David, the fact that she says the Lord tells me that she is already, I mean, she didn't say your God. She said the Lord, so that kind of personalizes it. Maybe
Yeah,
she
yeah.
already had committed herself to the faith.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going into this next section. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. So they make it. They make this long, difficult journey. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" Verse 20, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. So first, let's just think about that word stirred. So this is a small village, as most villages would have been at that particular time. We can imagine maybe a couple hundred people are a part of the community there at Bethlehem. And something's happening here that doesn't happen every day. Remember, it's not normal for people to leave outside of some extraordinary circumstances. And if they leave, it would require, they would be facing some extraordinary circumstances that would bring them back, because movement between places was not just, let's fill up the car and get on the highway and we'll make our way back to Bethlehem. It's a long and perilous journey. So this is something that doesn't happen every day. They're stirred because, oh my gosh, somebody is returning from Moab. Naomi has been away, we can maybe estimate 15 to 20 years. We know that the boys were married for 10 years. We don't know how old they were when they got there. So maybe 15 to 20 years she's been gone. And yet she is known by the people. So again, it's a small village, a couple hundred people. She's someone who is known by them even after being away for maybe as much as two decades or more. But I don't know about you, but I don't look the same way I did 20 years ago. Did anybody else? No? Nobody wants to fess up to that? You look a little bit different than you did 20 years ago? So we can imagine there's some physical change. So when they ask the question, can this be Naomi? Well, that's probably part of it is, well, you kind of look like Naomi. You're a little bit different. 20 years has passed. But maybe also there is just in her physical presence, it's not only the change of her age, but the change of her circumstance. You think about people that you have, that you know in your life who have been through significant grief. Not only the loss of her husband, but then the loss of her sons. There is an emotional expression of grief, but there's also a physical expression of grief. And so we can imagine that there's not only, okay, she doesn't look the same way physically because she's aged since she's been gone, but I'm trying to think of the phrase that Julian uses, life has been lifing. She's gone through some really, really heavy things in her life. And so we can imagine that but when she left, she was standing tall, proud of her family and how God had blessed her. She's maybe returning a little bit more stooped over, not because of age, but because of just very, very difficult circumstances that she's lived in. And so Naomi responds by saying, "Don't call me Naomi." Well, as you know, in the Old Testament world, names are really important. Names express something about someone's character, or even how they looked. Does anybody know what Esau means? Red and hairy. Do you know why he was named Esau? He was red and hairy when he was born. Wouldn't you love that to be the story of your name? Why'd you name him that? Well, he was red and hairy. And so we decided to. So Naomi means pleasant. And so for her to hear her name, to hear herself referred to as Naomi, is almost an ironic insult, given what she has gone through in her life. So don't call me pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because she says, the Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Now, here's what I would encourage for you to think about as we hear these words from Naomi. This is Naomi's perspective on what she has been through. This is how Naomi at this point is making sense of what she has been through. She sees this as the Lord afflicting her, the Lord bringing this misfortune upon her, that the Lord has brought her back empty. This is not necessarily Naomi expressing a theological conviction from the scriptures that we would say, oh yes, this is exactly what has happened. This is Naomi speaking about how she has experienced this. So just for a moment, I thought we would talk about Naomi's grief, because this is really the main theme of chapter 1. Again, she's kind of the main character of this opening act of the book of Ruth. And what we see here is a woman who has been broken by life, who has found herself in this place of great vulnerability. She's returning home simply with the hope that someone will take care of her. And just a few things to point out about Naomi's grief. The first is that she's honest about it. Naomi doesn't deny the pain that she's experienced, not only in the way she presents herself in returning to Bethlehem, but also in the way that she speaks to her daughters-in-law when she's talking to them about them returning to Moab. She sees no reason to camouflage or mask her pain. I came across this quote this week just in preparing. Let us not pretend that death doesn't hurt. Let us not pretend that death doesn't hurt or that grief isn't real. So there is an appropriate mourning that should take place when someone dies, when we lose someone that we love. And I just think that's important to point out, because some people really struggle with that. They struggle with, I feel this way, and maybe I shouldn't feel this way. I mean, again, we had Easter, right? Resurrection, eternal life. So is it okay for me to feel the pain of loss? Is the questioning that I have, whether it's the sudden loss of a spouse or a parent or even a child or an extended family member, a close friend. The questions that come out of that: why did this happen? Why did God take this person from me? Again, just the questions that people ask in that and wrestle with. Is it okay that I'm even asking these questions? How am I supposed to process this? How do I process grief? And so I thought we just talk a little bit about that, about Naomi's grief and how she expresses it, and maybe what we learn here about what appropriate mourning might be. And so we have some people in the room I know who leave grief recovery here in our church. We got a counselor right over here. I saw you last night, and I thought, I really hope Teresa's here tomorrow, because we can talk about the stages of grief. But what are your thoughts on what we're seeing from Naomi here?
Well, back in the 1800s, women wore black for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a custom like that in those times?
Yes. Yeah, so part of the custom was a physical expression of grief. I put you on the spot, Teresa. You got to raise your hand.
Can I ask questions not related to grief?
Hold your questions not
I've been
related to
saving
grief.
questions up that I don't fully understand exactly. The Moabites were descendants of Lot, and
That's what was pointed out last week, yeah.
and that made me wonder why Lot wasn't part of God. In other words, your God will be my God. Did Lot have a different God, or did the Moabites have a different God? I know there were some conflicts about territory and so forth, but that kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, so the short answer to your question is yes, they did have a different God. The additional short answer is these people are human beings just like we are human beings. And so they lived in a tribal world in the same way that we live in a tribal world. Part of the way that we often, as human beings in our sinful nature, seek to identify ourselves or make ourselves feel more valuable is we seek to distance ourselves from others. Those people are not like us, and in doing so, we take the things that are us and we seek to elevate them above others. So the world is as it has always been. Human beings are as they have always been.
Territorial.
Territorial, there's all sorts of words.
Clan.
Yeah.
The other question was, if they were married, if the daughters were married for 10 years and didn't have any children, that strikes me as being a little unusual.
I don't know if it was unusual, but it certainly added to their vulnerability. In that if they had children, even if they were younger, that would have provided them some sort of security.
Connection, yeah.
Yeah.
The other question had to do with the famine. In my head, 60 miles or 50 miles doesn't feel like very far. Maybe it wasn't back in those days.
You want to go for a walk today?
Well, you don't understand my point, maybe. You know, in Texas, you have a famine in this county, but you don't in this county. Mm-hmm. This strikes me as a little bit different than what we could expect. Of course, I've been over there, and I can see how the desert area might be a different climate.
Yeah, being over there, you're certainly grateful for the bus. Is another way to think about it. I mean, 50 to 60 miles, pre the wheel, that's a pretty significant. Take at least a week, and of course you're showing up with stuff. You know, you don't have just a little suitcase. They're relocating, so they're bringing possessions, and again, one of the reasons that it wasn't done. Anybody want to go back to grief?
When I was in seminary in the Dark Ages, back in the 1970s, the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was very popular. The book that most people remember that she wrote on death and dying, and she talks about the 5 stages of grief. Your original question was
appropriate mourning. What insight can we gather here about what appropriate mourning might look like?
appropriate warning.
Mourning.
Oh, okay.
Grief.
Yes. I think, she speaks about the denial of death. Mm-hmm. And I think some very religious people may be prone to say, Jesus lives, and, this is a bump in the road, and this doesn't affect me. And as an example of a denial of the grief, mm-hmm. the grief is normal, mm-hmm. Regardless of how religious you are.
Yeah, yeah. So Teresa, and then Suri, give that mic to Cindy.
You're on. Teresa first? No.
Teresa, go ahead.
One thing about Naomi, thinking about her, she's grieving, but her whole life has been wiped out from under her. I mean, mm-hmm. any security she might have. So, for us, grief is you can go through the denial and things, but as women, we can go on and find other things. But for her, she didn't have any hope other than mm-hmm. where she was. So her grief, normally when you grieve, you have to, number one, admit it. And it's hard sometimes, and like somebody said, when you're a Christian, you think, oh, I'm supposed to believe in heaven and all this, but you grieve the loss, and that's what grief is, a loss. And so the loss includes depression and anger and bartering and then acceptance. And when you've lost everything, your sons and your husband, that's your everything. And so for her, it was a severe grief.
Yeah.
She's not just grieving one thing, it's the loss of everything.
Right,
And that's
right.
where she's saying, I'm bitter, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do get in that stage of feeling like, you know, their life is over because of their loss, but it's not. And that's where the hope in Jesus Christ helps us through that grief. But it's not easy. It's still a journey we all have to go through.
Yeah. So I wanted Cindy to speak. She did not raise her hand. I wanted Cindy to speak because, you know, one of the ministries of our church is grief support. And it's an important ministry of our church. And so from that perspective of Cindy, who oversees that and helps lead that, what would you add in here?
Well, one of the things I thought of immediately with Naomi was when she's talking about how bitter she feels and how God has opposed her, I immediately wondered about the support system, about how, did she have anybody that she could just really go to? Did she have, even though she had Ruth, and I was going to say Oprah, but anyway.
You can say, yeah, it's a verifiable
yes,
fact.
thank you, Orpah. Did she really talk to them about how she felt? Did she really talk to them about how devastating not only the loss of her husband was, but then, you know, her sons? So that's one of the things here, you know, that we really emphasize in our Journey Through Grief classes, which we do twice a year, is the fact that not only denial, but the thing is you have to have that support system. You
Yeah.
have to have somebody to walk along with you on that journey, to walk with you in those times when you don't understand, why am I mad? You know, why am I angry? People tell me I should be over this. And everybody goes through it at different stages. So I just kept thinking about that when I read this. Did she have that? I feel that Naomi really loved her and was ready to do whatever it took to be with her, you know, have her God and show her that. But did she have that person that she really could talk to and just say, I hurt, I'm mad, and I'm angry?
Yeah. Okay, Robbie over here, and then we'll get to the piece here in chapter 2 we want to read today.
Well, it seems clear to me that Naomi blames God for all of this, and to forgive God for it. You know, she's in a particular situation different than other things. This is your world, and you blame him for it. Why did he do this to me? And I do think that's one thing when people struggle with grief like that, who do they blame? Are they blaming God for it? Well, the question is, is he in control of my life? Therefore, then I can blame him because he was in control and he did this to me. So, am I making any sense?
Yes, you are, and I appreciate you stating it so bluntly. That it's good to think of it that she is blaming God, and with that to add, this is not out of the norm. It's not. This is how people feel in grief, and one of the things I share with families is whatever you're feeling, it's okay. God is big enough for your doubts. God is big enough for your anger. Whatever well, go ahead.
One of the things the story leaves out is that the fact that Ruth was also grieving during this period of time as well.
Yeah. Yeah, these are really two women who are united by their grief. Ruth Ann?
Well, one thing that we haven't talked about is sometimes when there's been a long illness, you've been grieving for
yeah.
maybe years. And at the time of death, what you really feel is joy.
Yeah. Okay, Denny, and then we're going to jump into chapter 2.
On the subject of grief, I think what happens, and it was probably a little bit different back in those days, but you have to establish a new identity. You identified back, when you're married, you identify with a certain relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you lose that, you have to figure out who you are.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so we're gonna turn to chapter 2, and I'm gonna encourage you to think of this as Act 2 of a play. So we've had the opening scene, the opening act, chapter 1. Naomi's the central character of chapter 1. The theme of the opening act is, we might say, the theme is grief. The theme is loss, and just the search for hope. Here we go to Act 2, and in verse 1, we're going to be introduced to a new character. So Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. So again, we're introduced to a new character in verse 1, and this was something that really struck me as I was preparing for today. The reminder, I hadn't even really picked up on this before, that verse 1 is really a note for us as the reader. It is not necessarily a note of Naomi's understanding of who Boaz is. This is jumping forward into what Jan will be sharing next week. You're teaching next week, right? Ruth is going to meet Boaz here in a minute, and in what we read next week, Ruth's going to share about this person that she has met, and we're going to read about Naomi's surprise, but also her awareness. She knew there was a man named Boaz who was from the family, from the clan of her husband Elimelech. But here's what she did not know. She did not know he was a man of standing. So that phrase is really important. This is a man of standing within the family, within the clan. But a man of standing is also a way of referring to the wealth, the abundance of this particular member. So we're sort of given this little window into, hey, there's this person here. And then we have Ruth going out to glean after the harvesters. So if you just want to make a note here, Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. This is one of the instructions from God to the people of Israel. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. So this was one of the things that was prescribed to Israel, but we should carefully note that it was not necessarily always practiced in Israel. The prophets later on, one of the things that they rebuke Israel for is because they do not practice what is prescribed here in Leviticus 19 of leaving the leftovers for the poor and the foreigners. Because to allow gleaning, think of it this way, to allow gleaning was an act of faith. In the same way that the Israel in the wilderness who are given manna, part of the instruction is you take the manna you need for today and you trust that there will be more manna provided by God tomorrow. If anything they collected that was in abundance of what they needed, it's spoiled. God will take care of you tomorrow. You take what you need for today. So it's an act of faith. These are people living in an agrarian culture. They knew hunger. They knew what it was like to go without food. And so to leave food behind, God's inviting them to an act of faith that is also an expression of the character of God. That phrase, I am the Lord your God, in Leviticus, associated with many of the things, the instructions that God gives to Israel, this phrase is added there. I am the Lord your God. In other words, what I am prescribing to you is an expression of who I am. And you are to live this out because who I am is who you are also supposed to be. So this is Israel coming to an understanding that we serve a God who shows specific concern for the poor. That just sounds like, well, duh, to us. Like we have an understanding of that. But remember, we're living in this is an ancient world where you served your gods and your gods took care of your people and only your people, and your gods actually fought against other people and other gods. And here we have Yahweh expressing God's heart to the people through this particular prescribed practice. You are to leave this for the poor, leave it for the foreigner, because I care about them. And that was different than other gods. So there's some danger here for Ruth to even go out and participate in this. She's hoping, in her words, to find someone in whose eyes I might find favor, because she didn't know if they were following this particular practice. As it turned out is the phrase that is used in the second half of chapter 3. The literal translation of that is her chance chanced upon. Her chance chanced upon. And so we're sort of left with this question of, is this an accident? Is it a coincidence? Is it God's providence? She just happens to end up in a field that belonged to Boaz. Naomi did not say, go to that field, because that field belongs to Boaz. These fields where they harvested wouldn't have had, big fences around them with Boaz's ranch, So she's simply there among the fields, and she happens to be in the field that belonged to Boaz. So let's keep going. Verse 4, just then, more language that sort of speaks to what's happening here. Is this an accident? Is this a coincidence? Is this God's providence? Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So we learn here in verse 7 something that we did not know when she began this work of gleaning. She actually did ask permission. Which again, she was aware of the danger here. She wanted to have the permission of the harvesters to be able to come along behind it and to glean among what was left over from what they were harvesting. Again, she was hoping for grace. She went there hoping for grace, that I will find someone who will show me favor. Random note: she did take a rest in the shelter. This is the ancient Hebrew practice of siesta. That's what I wrote in my notes here. Does anybody think that's funny? That's it. That's all I got. It's the only humor that I have, Jan. So that was normal practice. Let's continue. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. So I just want to end on this note. Oh, here we go. The clock's not on up there, so I was, 10:59. There's probably a sense here from what you know about the rest of the story, that Boaz is taken with Ruth. We know that a relationship will develop between these two, but we can probably at this point just see this as Boaz sees someone in the field that he doesn't know. Maybe he wasn't there when Naomi and Ruth first returned to Bethlehem, and so he doesn't recognize her. And so where does she come from? Whose family does she belong to? And we hear that she is a Moabite. Boaz would have known at this moment that she was even more vulnerable than another woman who might be gleaning in his field because she was a foreigner. And so what he says to her is, I want you to stay right here. And, you know, we've seen Hallmark movies, so we could easily just assume, oh, here we go. This is the beau. He's making his move on Ruth. But I would encourage you to think about it this way. This is Boaz saying, you will be safe here. You will be safe here. If you go over into that field, I can't guarantee that you'll be safe. I can't guarantee you that you will not be rebuked for gleaning in that field. I cannot guarantee that someone won't seek to take advantage of you over there. You will be safe here. My people here, we will take care of you. And also Boaz is saying, you are safe with me. So again, Ruth clung to Naomi. We have this picture of Ruth, even though she's not an Israelite, she is living like an Israelite. She is living out the value of what an Israelite should be, someone who clings. In her case, she's clinging to Naomi, and through Naomi, she's clinging to God. This is what the Israelites are supposed to do. They're supposed to cling to God. And then alongside Ruth, we have Boaz. And what is Boaz expressing right here? Well, he's also expressing the heart of God to this vulnerable woman who is in the most desperate situation imaginable. We hear Boaz speaking what we can imagine God was feeling towards Ruth. You are safe here, and you will be safe with me. We will take care of you. And so again, the importance of this book within the context of the Old Testament, of these great-grandparents of King David, we see a true Israelite in Ruth, in her commitment to Naomi and her commitment to Naomi's God. And then we also see it in the faithfulness, the gentleness, the kindness of Boaz, not only acting according to this prescribed practice of allowing gleaning in his field, but making sure that this young woman was taken care of and protected as she sought to provide for herself and to provide for Naomi. So, oh my gosh, 11:03, we got to stop right there, and we'll pass it back to Jan at verse 10 of chapter 2 next week. So let's close in prayer. Holy and loving God, even from a place perhaps of security for us today, where we're not worried about where our next meal may come from or whether we'll have a shelter over our heads tonight when we go to bed, we still acknowledge our vulnerability of how greatly we are in need of you, even if we don't see it. We somehow take so many of the things in our life for granted and miss how deeply we need you. And so we unite ourselves with that again this morning. We acknowledge that we are frail and we are mortal, and we long to find a place where we are safe and we will be taken care of. And we thank you, God, that is your promise to us. And so in faith this morning, we once again say we will cling to that. We will trust in that. We will trust in you. And so would you send us forth to be your people? In Jesus' name, amen.